Hi, and welcome to the CAFMA Connect. I'm your host, Fire Chief Scott Freitag, and with me today, gracing us with his presence, is Prescott Fire Chief Holger Durre. Good to see you, sir.
Really good to see you. Thanks for having me on again.
Or as Siri would say, Holger Deer.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad, once again, I can fill John Fedham a spot on your podcast. I don't know why he's failing you once again, but I get it. I'll take it up personally with him later.
I can't call him Deer.
That's true.
I can get away with that because that's what Siri says.
Yeah, that's a good point.
When I ask her to call you.
Yeah.
She's like, calling Holger Deer.
Deer.
But if I just ask Siri to call Deer, it won't do it. It says you don't exist.
Yeah. It just describes the nature of, the closeness of CAFMA and
That's
PFD.
Right. CAFMA and PFD working together.
That's right.
So I do want to start this week because, as you're well aware, we lost Captain Zach Fields a couple of weeks ago. This past weekend was his memorial. Be remiss if we didn't mention that. Just want to thank everyone from CAFMA that came out to support, everyone from CAFMA that was there at the memorial and as part of the IMT. Also want to thank you, Chief, for Prescott support. You were there at just about every meeting that we had for planning. A lot of your folks worked that day so that our folks could attend the services. And as always, we just really appreciate the partnership we have between us and you.
And you're welcome. And obviously in this region, there's not been a lack of experience, unfortunately, with events like this. And so it's so important to come together. And sometimes that is, being in those places so that the department can grieve and mourn. And we're absolutely glad to be a partner in all that.
Yeah, it's, I appreciate those, Bob Curry and Ron Litchfield, who served as liaisons to the family. I cannot even imagine how stressful or difficult that was for them. But they really did a great job at communicating and keeping the family informed, keeping the team informed, so that in the end, I think we did what we set out to do, which was honor Zach and honor Zach's family. And
I got so many great comments, just how nice of a service it was. And watching your agency come together under really stressful circumstances, that was really powerful to watch as well. That's not easy for an organization to go through that, and you guys pulled it off in a really, really respectful way. And I was very proud to be a partner of yours.
Well, and I appreciate you coming along with your senior staff and your lovely wife for being there to support us. We'll talk about mental health another time. I don't think right now is a good time for that. And because I think there's a point where we want to address, there's a lot that we can do, but we're never going to cover it 100%. And I just, now's not the time for that conversation, but I do want to get into that conversation at some point. Probably have Debbie Ritterbush, who's the owner of our trauma counseling agency, try to get her on the podcast as well. But going on, or moving forward with today's topic, we want to talk about a couple of things. The first is that clearly you and I and our agencies want to make sure that we're working more closely together. And so just from the podcast perspective, we have talked about it before that you and I should come on the podcast once a month, once every couple of months, to do something just as an update to both agencies, to our folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important, right? Communication in the fire service is always that big, how do you solve the problem? Well, obviously the answer is to communicate as much as you can in as many different ways as you can.
Right.
And especially when those collaborations start, I think there's a lot of questions that come about. There's a lot of excitement, and there's also some trepidation. And I think the best way to answer those is to get right ahead of it and have those conversations.
Yeah.
So,
well, and this is a great platform to kill rumors.
Absolutely.
Because rumors hate the light of day.
Yep.
And if you put them on the podcast, man, that's the best daylight you can get. Now, the other side of that was, and I talked to our senior staff about it, was we should kill a rumor, and then as senior staff, we should start a rumor and see where it goes. Because apparently when we say things, people listen when we don't think they're listening. Sometimes, but not always.
Not all the time.
Not all the time. Because I was talking with Chief DeChant, who's here with us today from AFMA, and he said, one of the biggest problems in his agency, which is why he's here today, remains communication, is they're spread pretty far across the valley. So using something like a podcast platform may work for them.
Yeah. And for us, it was such an interesting challenge for me, especially as a new fire chief, to figure out how do I solve that, because it's so culturally dependent as well. Agencies communicate in different ways. Like you said, there's always that telephone, tell a friend, tell a firefighter. But how do you as a fire chief and as a command staff get in front of these issues in a way where people take up on it? So I started a YouTube video literally with my iPhone on my desk one day when we were talking about force hire. And I was surprised how well it caught on.
Right.
And now I'm doing it every Friday. Every once in a while, like you, I bring on a guest to dispel rumors. But a lot of times it's just things that are happening in administration that maybe the floor firefighters or folks in our community risk reduction division or folks over in the forestry division don't necessarily have access to.
Right.
And it's so easy. And the other thing that I heard that I think that's really key is them seeing the fire chief actually talk about it, the emotion that's behind it, the authenticity that comes with the message makes it much easier for those firefighters and that those staff members to understand exactly what's going on. An email just doesn't cut it, in my opinion.
No.
And of course, along with that, the other thing that I'm learning as well, I can't only communicate by YouTube. I have to make sure that I get in front of our troops. And so actually this week I'm starting, once again, station visits with companies by companies. I'm lucky with a 5-station department that I can do that. But I think it's also very important. So,
Well, and I started week before last after Zach passed, trying to get out to some stations. But you're not talking an hour-long conversation. You're talking 2-3 hours at a time. So 10 stations spread out over 369 square miles. It takes a while to get out. I also showed Chris your YouTube because I said, look, here's another option. You guys could start sooner rather than later, trying to get all of the equipment in and get things set up. There are options to get information out just using your iPhone.
Correct.
And a lot of people do use that today. So, but when we talk about your 5 stations and being spread out, and we talk about 10 stations for CAFMA being spread out, you and I have talked about the system up here, and it's an interdependent system. Would you agree?
I would totally agree. And did you know that we're growing in the region?
Really?
Yeah.
I drove around today, and I was shocked to see a whole bunch of new homes that popped up out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. Yep, absolutely. And I think we're going to have to figure out a way to serve those homes.
We are, and the great thing is, I think, that we're having the conversation now about how do we work together to ensure that we cover the system, understanding the interdependent relationship that we have. Because if you empty Prescott Valley of engines, well, now we're pulling from you. If you empty Prescott of engines, then you're pulling from either Battalion 6 or Battalion 3 from us to pull in. So as the call volume continues to increase, the more we rely on pulling engines from other areas, which is great that we have the auto aid, but we don't have enough equipment, personnel in the system to cover the call demand that we have today in the Quad Cities.
Yep, that's absolutely correct. And I mean, the efficiency that the taxpayer gets out of the system that we have is great, but you're absolutely correct. We need to catch up to a place where we can effectively not just serve the population that's here now, but the population that is expected to grow into this area. As an agency, we've already had a conversation with our city council around the need for 2 new stations and the relocation of a 3rd. And that obviously shouldn't happen in a vacuum, because if I move a station and I place it 15 feet away from one of yours, then we've basically wasted taxpayer money, and that's not an efficient use of funding. I think the rumor that needs to get dispelled there is that, well, CAFMA and Prescott are going to build joint stations, and that's not the point of this exercise.
No, that's not what we're looking at all.
Absolutely. It is about building stations in a partnership where that capital investment of 50 to 75 years, millions of dollars, is put in the right place so that we work together to continue using that interdependent system at the most efficient factor. And I would say probably, without doing the math, we could probably figure out that if we were to do it independently as 2 different agencies, how many more stations we would need between the 2 in order to pull off the same amount of effective coverage. And
absolutely, especially if you're looking along 89A, where Granite Dells is going to eventually connect with Jasper.
Correct.
That's significant growth along that stretch of highway. We've already seen an increase in motor vehicle crashes and incidents along that corridor. So we know that we need a station back there, an additional one. You need a station back there. But like you said, we don't want to put them 15 feet apart. So strategically, we need to sit down and talk about, well, here's the call volume. Let's look at the data. Let's look at the heat mapping. and then let's determine the appropriate place to invest our capital strategically so that we're putting stations in the right place and they're good for the next 20, 30 years, 50 years, rather than right on top of each other too far apart.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up because the capital investment is a huge upfront investment. And so one of the things that both the city manager and the council have asked me to do is to produce ways that we can improve response times beyond just capital investments. And so we're looking at things like modernizing our station alerting, a move-up module. You and I have a meeting in November to figure out a better way to distribute those resources, as well as looking at low acuity calls in the system, some of the ways that we can maybe better handle EMS call volumes, to also, on top of those stations, do that. And the way, obviously, that you and I have talked about doing that is to combine our standards of cover approach. And that's something that I think for the viewers probably would be good to briefly explain, because that's kind of a weird term if you're not in the fire service. It's in essence the response contract with the community. And while it always comes out of the fire service accreditation model, there's plenty of agencies that have a standards of cover. And I would always say that regardless of accreditation, a standards of cover is a really good practice because of those deployment analysis, that effectiveness study, and really being able to tell the taxpayer that we're staying ahead of the trend, we're able to meet the response time objectives, and most importantly, if there's a gap between what we want to perform at and where we're actually currently at, that's where the conversation with the elected official starts to say, how can we close that gap in a responsible way?
Yeah, because there's a lot of planning that goes into where they go, but in addition, I was just at a conference last week, and not a developer, but one of the contractors that built fire stations was there. They gave a presentation, and they were saying, here's the stations we recently built. 7.9 million, 8 million, 9 million. We used to build these things for 2.5, 3 million. Now we're up to 7 to 10 million. And that means we have a significant investment in capital, and trying to come up with those dollars from a tax base is a challenge. Looking at bonds is a challenge. Everything we do regarding investing in infrastructure and capital is a challenge for whether you're a municipal government or a fire district. It's hard to get to the taxpayer and say, I need $8 to $10 million to build this fire station. They're like, but my house didn't cost that. You're right, but this is a commercial application. It's a commercial building. Now, one of the things we're doing, and it just hit me as we were talking about this, is we're going the Southwest Airlines route. So we are standardizing, and we're going to have all Boeing 737s.
Beautiful. Yep. And that's actually exactly the model that we've already proposed conceptually on our stations. We got to build 3 stations over the next 7 to 10 years. And in that time frame, it doesn't make any sense for me to design 3 stations 3 different ways. I can design the core, and most importantly, I can learn from other departments, particularly in the Valley. I just did a tour here about 2 months ago and looked at some of the modern station construction and some of the smart ways to build a station. But yeah, we can use that central core and then build the components that particular station needs. A 3-bay goes to a 4-bay. The community room in one station might become the emergency operations center in another. Those are, I just think, really smart ways to leverage that money.
Well, and it helps too on the contracting side because you already know this is the HVAC system that we use. This is the lighting package that we use. This is the appliance cabinet package that we have. It's very straightforward. It streamlines the process. It makes it better for facilities because now they can purchase up front and have in waiting, hey, we use this dishwasher for these stations, and we're going to have 2 sitting off to the side. It just makes more sense. And what we're doing is our Station 50 and Station 62 are very similar in design, and it seems to be the one that people gravitate to, but with some exceptions. So they're taking that basic model and saying, okay, let's add a 3rd bay, 3rd pull-through bay. Let's add the cold zones, hot zones, and warm zones for cancer prevention. And then this is kind of a weird design, so let's do this. And it's great, and I think it does streamline the process. It's still an expensive process, but I think we can make it better. Same thing we do with our engines. This engine is just like this engine over here, and everything's in the same spot.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a great point about station infrastructure that a lot of folks may not think about if they're not in the fire service, of how much a station impacts firefighter well-being. From cancer prevention, whether it's how we store bunker gear, how we exhaust fumes out of the apparatus bays, but also how we design the station in terms of mental health and how people feel in that environment, lighting. There's so much research that's been done now, and that may seem like a soft thing, but they've done hard research that impacts workers' compensation experience, employee satisfaction, and ultimately it does deliver a better end product to the customer.
Sure.
And so that can't be overlooked in modern station design. The last station Prescott built was in 1995. And that is obviously a big issue for our maintenance, but also on those issues that I just touched on. And so I'm really looking forward to designing a modern station where our firefighters can, operate safely and effectively to serve the citizens. So it's a big deal.
One of the things I saw with like lighting packages, for example, when we designed our admin building, it was a build out of an existing building. I told the architect, I want can lights with LED lights. That's it. Basic lights. Nothing crazy. And we got to a point in the build, and we're sitting down with the electrical contractor, and he's like, hey, these lights are going to take another 16 weeks or whatever it was to get in. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, they come from California, so I would recommend that you order a bunch of extra lights now. And I said, that's not what we wanted. Why can't we just do can lights with LEDs? And he said, oh, yeah, I can put those in tomorrow. So, part of that, yes, it does go to the firefighter well-being of the station, but it's also, can facilities go to Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace, the grocery store, and buy a replacement bulb, as opposed to having to special order something out of California? So those are things that we have to look at the same time. What are we doing in this design, and keeping an eye on the architects to make sure, no, this is what we said we wanted, because this is the most efficient for us as far as operation. I don't need a bunch of fancy lights that I can't replace. So just things to look at. But when we talk overall about standards of cover, because CAFMA now has gone back through accreditation training, so we're starting down the path again. CYFD was accredited. CAFMA has not been, but we're in a good place to move forward. So we're talking about the standards of cover. We're talking about station placement, but we're also talking about what does the deployment model look like when we talk about the fire service of the future? Because you and I agree, we can't throw a 24-hour engine at every increase in call volume. You mentioned earlier low acuity calls. Well, do we need an engine and an ambulance going on a low acuity call, or would we be better off with an alternate response unit with an EMT and a medic taking the low acuity, non-urgent calls and leaving the emergency response vehicles for emergency response? They're cheaper, lighter, faster, and you can make decisions as far as staffing based off of data, heat data, time of day data, all of that information, and say, you know what, low acuity calls typically happen during this time of day, and it's usually during the daytime. So we're going to have the low acuity unit up for 10 hours, and then in the evening, either that crew goes home or the crew's dispersed to make 4-person engines for overnight, which we know statistically we have more structure fires at night. So it adds to our overall strategic ability to respond to calls with an effective firefighting force during the times that we need an effective firefighting force. But we can handle the lower acuity calls without moving the giant toolbox for everything.
Yeah, and I would say there's even further avenues that we can explore, things like diverting calls even at the 911 center, so they don't even enter the system, and using things like Nurse Navigator and other services where we can potentially reduce even that load on the dispatcher themselves, that once they identify a certain set of criteria, they actually get it to another resource where we can get primary care involved rather than sending a 911 resource, which I think is a really effective way. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think there's so much room for us to say plan A no longer works, and really plan D is already a little bit behind. And so we really have got to push that edge of the envelope and get creative. And to your point, we got to think about the business model and how we can integrate smarter thinking into what we've always done without losing the tradition. Fire departments will never go away. But it's the way that we do things. We need to be relevant to the community today.
Well, and here's another side of this that people don't know about or don't often think about. We're having trouble recruiting and retaining people in the fire service today. Mm-hmm. Yeah. For whatever reason, people don't want to get into this profession. And what we're hearing from some of them is that the 24-hour, 48-hour shifts don't work for their family life or their schedule. Mm-hmm. And we have a 40-hour engine that we have 4 more senior members of the agency on, and they absolutely love it. So the more alternative shift opportunities that you can provide, potentially the more you can diversify your workforce and recruit people to the profession, because now it's not just you have to work 24 or 48 hours. It's, well, no, you could be on a 40-hour work week on this type of unit.
Exactly. Yeah, and it gives that employee more choice, and it gives us a recruiting tool. Actually, and also places that, as being on the same kind of an engine for a long time, sometimes you have to shift to different resources depending on the point in your career, but still effectively serve. And
right.
Yeah, that's definitely a great use of resources.
So there's a lot of things that we can look at. I know I've talked to Priority Ambulance. They approached me about, hey, could we partner with an ARU? Well, as a fire chief, I'm looking at that saying, well, that's one less person I have to hire. Mm-hmm. So you hire one, I hire one. I just save money, and I'm better serving the system. Yep. And then if we're working jointly, then those alternative response units really aren't dedicated to one area necessarily. Correct. So your ARU can respond into my ARU can respond into your area because it's an auto aid type of thing. The same with 40-hour engines. I know Golder Ranch Northwest down to the Tucson area, they each have a 40-hour engine that offset each other. Some days during peak times, there's 2 40-hour engines, and off days where you have less of that peak, then maybe only one of the 40-hour engines is up, and it depends on which weekend as to whether it's a Northwest or a Golder rig.
And that's that smart deployment, right? I mean, it's leveraging our resources in a smart way. And I think one of the things about the regional standards of cover that's really important is our data sets on their own in each entity is not necessarily large enough for us to inform decisions. But if we put that data together and we evaluate the entire system, now an ARU deployment analysis, the way that you're proposing, is effective, is smart, and can be really, useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at what's a Ford pickup, $70,000. Yeah. The tow truck to go with the Ford, it's another $80,000.
Well,
so it basically buy a Ram, and then you don't have those problems. But a pickup versus an engine, significantly different. 60, 70,000 versus 850. It makes sense from a business standpoint. It makes sense from a strategic model standpoint.
It does.
Long-term serving the community. And you and I have even talked about the emergency medical dispatch and setting up where, hey, maybe some of those calls are diverted via a PA on the phone. Maybe there's an alpha type, so non-urgent call that just an ARU goes on, and then a Bravo, which would be an urgent call, but really only requires one medic and EMT. Maybe just the ambulance goes on, and then Charlie Delta Echo calls. Now you're talking about ambulance and an engine, and then add additional resources from there on the medical side of the call. Because some of those, and people need to understand this, when we're talking about medical, we're not just talking about slip, trip, and fall, cardiac arrest. We're also talking about motor vehicle crashes.
And I'm glad you said that, because really the standards of cover is built off of a risk assessment. That's the foundation that the standards of cover is built off of. And I think we can even expand that into the way we dispatch structure fires in the region. I think that's, technical rescue calls. A single family home versus a commercial structure fire should get a different response level. And, by engaging in this in a partnership, we'll be able to do that in a much more effective way.
Absolutely. And that all goes back to the effective firefighting force that your ISO rating is set with. And if you're not moving an effective firefighting force to a structure fire, then your ISO rating is higher, which means your residents and your businesses, their insurance rates are higher.
Exactly.
And we don't want to see that.
Nope. Yeah. And it's, I think, such a great planning tool that once elected officials and the members of the department begin to embrace it and understand it, it really becomes a powerful tool to have conversations, not just at the board meeting or at the council meeting,
Right.
but even for company officers when they're getting ready to take on that responsibility as a brand new company officer, understanding how system status management influences standards of cover response performance. Now, that's obviously a couple of years ahead of where we're at right now, but really, I think it illustrates the bigger picture of what we can do with this and really design a response system for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And for less money for the taxpayers,
Exactly.
which is what our elected officials and our residents want to see. We want a system that provides service when we call 911. We want it to be cost effective but efficient. And I think we have some ideas that we've discussed today that can improve the system overall, provide for the increased call volume, make sure that capital dollars are being spent wisely, invested in the proper areas and the proper places as we work through standards of cover and accreditation for both agencies. I think the regional standard of cover is it's a great idea that you had. I'm glad you brought it to me because I'm not well versed enough in accreditation yet to know or understand that we could do that. So having that regional standard for us, I think, is vital as we move forward. And then we're talking about other things that we can do together, work on together, including with our fire prevention divisions and working with contractors, some things that we could bring our two entities together and work on, potentially some joint staffing in the future, not joint staffing and staffing the same station, but hey, if you've maxed out your overtime call list and you're still short, you can have access to our overtime call list so that you can get someone to fill the slot on the engine that needs to be filled.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are things that are just smart, and it's brought about by our geography, right? I mean, here we are in the Quad Cities, sort of on this little island. We can't call for more help.
No.
It won't get there for at least 45 minutes. And so for us to work like this isn't just a good idea. It really is the only thing, the right thing to do, not just for the departments, but for the citizens that we jointly serve.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's necessary. And that's why us doing this together, I think more regularly, and we'll figure out what that is, whether it's every couple of months, once a month, once a quarter, where you and I come on and we talk about something like this, standards of cover. We give an update on the standards of cover. We're both working on strategic plans. You're deep in the process right now. We're going to be reviewing and renewing ours in spring. I've reached out to the company that you're using, and I think City of Buckeye used the same company. So really good feedback from them. I've already received a call back. But you'll be involved in that strategic plan process just as you've invited us to be involved in yours. Because, again, everything that you do or everything that I do, it has an impact on the other organization. So the more that we're in lockstep working together, the more efficient and cost-effective we are.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Speaking of capital investments, I do have one question for you. I heard recently that you have been riding on some engines lately. Now, given your history with Jeeps, is the fleet at CAFMA okay, or do you need to borrow an engine since they probably broke if you were anywhere near?
They're not letting me drive.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That explains a lot.
Because they'll pull up next to somewhere and they're like, we can't go up that. This engine won't make it. And my response is, well, let me drive. And then they don't.
I don't think an engine will fit in your shop.
I can, and not in my shop, but I could work on it in the shop here.
Oh, that's true.
I can weld.
Yeah,
We
that's
can
a good
put
point.
it back together. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's just suspension. I was speaking of that just real quick, and then we'll end it. But one of the new rescues that we have sits really low to the ground. So I told Fleet when I first saw it, I said, just order some extra bumpers. And the manager questioned why, and I said, did you look at the angle of departure on this thing? This bumper's not going to last long. We need to get another one. I said, the other option is, let's get it up in the air. Let me take a look at the suspension. Pretty sure we can lift it.
That does not surprise me at all, and you are just the man to do it. I've seen you, work some magic in a shop, and I have no doubt that that's going to be a tricked-out ambulance.
We get the right size tires on there. Be awesome.
Nice.
Coilovers.
Rescue Moab Edition.
Ooh, I like that one. That's a good title. That's what we're going to put on it. Rescue Moab Edition.
I love it.
We are working some things right now with Priority that you might be interested in. to increase supply chain issues, clearly, to increase the number of ambulances they're able to put up in the system. We're talking to them about leasing a couple of our units so that they could be run more efficiently rather than, hey, engine 50's on a call, 53, can you run the rescue over to them? We would have a priority staffed CAFMA rescue, but it would say, priority. It would also have priority on the side. I can't remember what it's supposed to say, but would have priority on the side, and we would look at joint staffing that at least as a stopgap until the supply chain catches up. But we need to improve the overall system.
Yep.
And if priority leasing a couple of units from us at a fair market value can improve that, because if you improve the call volume on our side or the ability to respond to the call volume on our side by adding additional resources, then it increases the number of resources in the city of Prescott, which means your response times are lower for a transport ambulance.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And we're actually working with Lifeline on a very similar initiative in terms of helping us get some extra resources in the system, including the discussion of a limited CON for the city of Prescott, which I think is exactly the right thing to do. It's that partnership. It builds that backbone. It builds resiliency. And at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. The supply chain is not just in the rolling stock, right? I mean, the supply chain is in the EMTs and the paramedics that staff those ambulances. Right. And so for us to be a responsible partner in that and come to the table and meet you guys basically in the middle on that, I think is very, very smart all the way around.
Yeah. And our CON application is still in. We're still working on that. It's been, we submitted it October 29th, 2021. So coming up on a year. So I think we're pretty close on the Bureau finishing their review, and then we'll see what happens from there. It doesn't have to go to hearing, but if there's someone out there that wants to intervene and take us to hearing, then we have to go through the legal process, which could drag it out another 6, 8, 10 months beyond that. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully they don't. Hopefully they recognize that having us up here and having our CON with just a couple of units in the system does nothing more than supplement.
Right.
And yes, we're running closest unit response, but if you look at the call volume, as we talked about earlier, it continues to increase. And we need more transport units in the system. We don't have them. Correct. So this is a way for us for CAFMA, and then if you get yours, just to ensure that our residents are taken care of and that we have a strong working relationship with our private partners.
Yeah, and I think one important thing to talk about there with the private partners that we're now working within the region and with the two fire departments, no one of those partners has not said that there is a challenge. That's, I think, the agreement. I think the public thinks that there might be a lot of disagreement about that. Well, the root cause is there's full agreement. We have challenges serving a growing Quad City area, and these initiatives are smart. They're right. They're ethical. And for us as fire chiefs, that's exactly what we should be doing: is advocating for better citizen service. Yeah,
and I'll just say from the CAFMA side, we did have to go down a path to get people to admit there's problems up here. And not everybody appreciated the path that we went. It was the only path that we had because we tried all the others. But today, I think everybody understands the challenges that face the area, and we're doing everything we can to work together. And I'd like to give a shout out in that vein to Lifeline AMR as well as Priority for their support during Captain Field's memorial and the candlelight vigil. And when they moved Captain Field's body from Phoenix up to Prescott, as we stood along Cortez, there were Priority and Lifeline AMR folks standing shoulder to shoulder. So as we've said from the beginning, at least on the CAFMA side and what we've done, our issue has nothing to do with those folks in the field.
Absolutely.
It's just a corporate business thing that management of CAFMA and management of AMR have to work through. But overall, I think we're moving in the right direction. It is just a blessing to have you here in the region and have a partner that is willing to come out and just hit the ground running and start pushing some things, moving some obstacles, and really working together in the vein that we've needed to for years. And so it's great to see it. I know our folks in the field appreciate it to a point, except when they think that we're doing something nefarious because we want you two to get along, but you're getting along, and now it makes us nervous.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the way I describe it to our agency is it's the difference between a Kairos and a Chronos moment. A Chronos moment comes along at any time. You can you take the opportunity, whenever you want. But a kairos moment, in its true definition, is kind of when all the factors come together.
Mm-hmm.
The right players are at the table, the right conditions exist. And for us, that's the political environment, that's the cultural environment,
Mm-hmm.
where we're at as an agency. That's when it's time to capitalize and be aggressive about these collaborations in a smart way so that we can move both of our agencies forward.
Absolutely.
So
And that's exactly what we need to do, and that's why we're here doing this.
that's exactly right.
Hey, thanks for coming out today. I know you had to cut your earlier meeting short and travel all the way from Prescott to here, but I look forward to the next time we get together with this, and I think we have some meetings coming up next week. So, Chief, thanks for coming down. For all of you out there, keep working together in the field and stick by each other.